Okay, we are at the hour for those on track 2. We have Michael Schueler with us. He's going to be presenting black and blue or white and gold, minimizing vulnerability scoring discrepancies due to limited information. And then Michael, when you are ready for questions, I will run the mic to those who have their hands up for you to engage with.
Sounds great. Thank you very much for the introduction. Okay, thank you everyone for joining today. Welcome to this talk. Just for those of us you who don't know me yet, a bit of background on myself. My name is Michael Schueler. I'm working as an incident manager at Cisco's PSIRT team. I came to Cisco in 2007, fresh from university, and I'm with the PSIRT realm since 2016. Well, as my day-to-day job as a senior incident manager at the Cisco PSIRT, I'm typically handling the most challenging, complex, impactful vulnerabilities and compromises. Spend like half of my time like putting out fires, and the other half trying to make sure that those fires don't reignite by developing lessons learned, feeding back into our SDL program, developing best practices, such as the ones that we always see in the course of this talk. This is a quick intro. So some of you may recall this photograph, which went pretty viral online in 2015, so a few years back now, which is a pretty simple photo in itself. But then there was a huge debate on whether this dress was actually blue or black or white or gold. And it turned out that in fact the dress was blue and black, but many people, including myself, see it actually as white and gold. And if you don't believe me, or just talk to the people around you, that there might be surprisingly different opinions. And what this revealed is that while we are all looking at the same thing, we may perceive things differently. There's been a big scientific effort trying to understand why this different perception has been since that time. The latest I saw, there was still no consensus on why exactly we have those discordant perceptions of the image. One theory is that it's related on what the viewer's brain expects the light of the color of the ambient light to be. For those that see it blue and black, they expect the ambient light to be more in the yellowish realm, while those that see it as white and gold, their brain expects the ambient color to be more in the bluish realm. So what's this all to do with vulnerability management, with disclosure? Well, there are certain similarities, and so let me present the problem that we are going to talk about here. For most of us in the PSIRT realm, everything typically starts with a new bug being filed, either by ourselves or by peer teams. Eventually, that bug is then reported to the PSIRT team. Someone thinks, well, okay, it might be a vulnerability, so maybe better to let the PSIRT know about it. PSIRT then looks into that, analyzes the vulnerability, analyzes the bug, and to determine, well, are there any security implications? Are we considering the vulnerability or not? And eventually, we confirm this is actually a vulnerability, and the PSIRT process starts to further work that vulnerability. That process includes calculating CVSS scores. Eventually, we assign a CVE to it, and then finally, at some point, we disclose that vulnerability. What we typically do via security advisory. What also happens is that, well, especially for those of you that are their own CNA, as Cisco is too, we also submit our CVE information to the National Vulnerability Database, the NVD, via the Collaborative Vulnerability Metadata Acceptance Process, or short CVMAP. What happens next then there is that, eventually an analyst at the NVD side will review the data and the CV information that we submitted, and will also calculate their own CVSS score based on their view of the issue. So the NVD team will look into it, analyze the information, and then come up with their own score. Once they have done this, they will then publish the NVD score together with the CNA score on the NVD website. And in some cases, we see something like we also see here, that what the NVD score is an 8.6, while the CNA score, so the Cisco score in this case, is 6.8. The question that comes up is, why is that? How can that be? We are both looking at the same vulnerability, yet we come up with completely different scores. So that's basically what triggered the investigation here, and what will then lead later to some best practice that I'm going to present. So first, let me say, luckily, we have a good bit of data that we can look into here, because thankfully the NVD shares their data in terms of audit reports with the respective CNA. So in each of these audit reports, NVD reviews 40 CVEs. Given we are talking about CISSP 3.1 at this point, for each CVE, we have 8 different CVSS metrics. So in a total, we'll end up at 320 metrics that are compared per report that's shared by NVD. And in many cases, the metrics match, but there are some cases in which the metrics do not match, and those are exactly those that were of interest to me in this investigation. So that's those metrics that did not match were what I looked at further. And the first thing I did here was that I tried to identify the best match based on just the facts in the CVE database itself on that vulnerability. For the first set that NVD shared with us on October 6th of last year, we had like about half of the CVEs, or half of the metrics where the Cisco score appeared to be the best match based on the vulnerability facts. There was also some where NVD was the best match, but there was a big chunk where it was really unclear what was the best match. For those where we had clear, that those also again were not of much interest anymore. Then for the second chunk, it was also a big part where it was clear either way or the other. And the large amount of incorrect Cisco metrics was there due to the tooling limitation that we had until mid of last year, where we introduced a new concept where we disclosed multiple vulnerabilities as part of a single advisory. And our tooling would always just put the worst score on the advisory level, and that score would be submitted to NVD because of that tooling limitation for all the CVs of that publication, which of course resulted in an incorrect data in the NVD database. That's luckily long fixed. So we fixed that already mid last year, so that's no longer an issue today. The root cause was known, so that also wasn't of further interest. So what we want to focus on is all the unclear ones. And I think that the best way to look into that further is to give you an example. And this example basically showed many of the problems that we later identified. It was a vulnerability in Cisco's Firepower Threat Defense software, more specifically its Snort 3 engine, and within the Snort 3 engine, the geolocation IP filter component, and it basically allowed that IP filter to be bypassed. What we see here, when we look at the scores that NVD came up with and that Cisco as the CNA came up with here, is that, they do differ. And they differ in 2 aspects. The first one is attack complexity, where Cisco scored this as high, while NVD thought, well, this is low complexity. We don't see any reason why this would be high complexity. And after I read through the vulnerability description that you can see on the screen right now, I also didn't see any reason for why the attack complexity might be high. So I dug a bit deeper into our internal information. And it turned out that, well, in order to be able to exploit this successfully, not only you had to spoof an IP address, but you had to spoof the correct IP address. That correct IP address, determine the correct IP address, was something that, well, that was out of the scope to be able to do for the attacker directly. So this is what well, the analysts that scored this on our side were considering an implementation-specific secret, and that's why we scored this as high attack complexity. The second factor where we didn't agree on the score was scope change. And we scored this as, well, there's a scope change involved here. Well, MVD found no reason for that. And also here, when we read through the advisory itself, there's no immediate hint towards the scope change. If you know the product in depth, you will know that the firewall threat defense is one of our next generation firewalls. So firewalls typically protect other networks. And what was possible with this IP filter bypass was that, well, you could access network segments that were normally not supposed to be accessed if you were to successfully exploit this vulnerability. So that was the reason why on the Cisco side we considered this scope change. And I know that there's been a lot of debate around scope either way, with both CSS v3.1 and also the changes done to it in CSS 4.0, which I won't comment any further on. There's other discussions going on also on this conference, I think on Monday already, that went into more depth than that. But what became clear after also discussing our findings with NVD, and here I have to thank Chris Turner and Tanya Brewer from NVD, were very helpful to go on a call and discuss all the findings with me. It turned out that also the perception that we had at Cisco, that, well, when we have a filter bypass and there's a protected network that we consider a security boundary, that this was not a given fact, because NVD didn't view that protected network as a security boundary at the time. So this example demonstrates several factors that can lead to a different perception of a given vulnerability. That was, well, insufficient information on the CVE description, focus on technical detail. So all this summary says that we can bypass IP address restrictions, but it doesn't really say, well, what can we do by bypassing that, which is accessing protected resources. Limited product knowledge, that was also something that came out of the discussion with NVD. NVD analysts are not product experts. So that also played into this, that they would not necessarily have been aware that this was a firewall device, and then also different interpretations of the CSS standard. In summary, what we found, also investigating others, is that, well, the far and foremost reason for differences in scores was insufficient information in the textual CVE description. And here we had several things that we found, so especially around tech complexity. Why is it do we consider it high? On the privilege levels that are required, while the score may show one or the other. So what does that privilege level really mean in the context of the product? Why are we considering a scope change? And well, in a few cases, there was also, we were scoring a high integrity impact, but no availability impact. So how can that be? And then there were a few corner cases which definitely could have used some additional explanations. The second thing that we found was that in several cases, the textual description of the CVE focused too much on technical detail on how to exploit the vulnerability rather than outcome. Very prominent example here is that, well, the text description would focus on something being a path traversal vulnerability and the attacker being able to do a path traversal attack. But yeah, what does it actually mean? What can the attacker achieve by exploiting path traversal? Which could, for example, be allowing reading arbitrary files on the underlying operating system. So that also made it difficult for others to really understand and gauge the impact here. The next part is, as I mentioned before, limited product knowledge at NVD. And that's not really surprising. The NVT team is relatively small, and each analyst covers thousands of products across hundreds of vendors. So there's really no way for them to be able to keep up on product details. So it would really help them if we would make our explanation as detailed as possible to allow them to understand that as easily as possible. And finally, the last thing that we found was CVSS specification and interpretation differences, which I'll go into a bit more detail just a bit. So now that we have identified what the reasons were, what are we going to do next? There are some things that Cisco plans on changing to improve the situation here. And this focuses mostly on advisory and CVE summary, which totally is the same for us. So our advisory summary is what we're also submitting as a CVE summary. And what we want to change there is that we'll first explain why attack complexity is high if we set that, make the required privilege level explicit, also in the context of the product, so customers can really understand how a given privilege level relates to the privilege model of the product. Explain reasoning for scope change. We need to add context to corner cases. Like what I indicated earlier, so we had something where we scored something with a low privilege level required and high impact to integrity. But in most cases, if you can fully compromise integrity, there's also an availability impact associated. Why is that not the case? What's the specific about that vulnerability or that product that makes that the case? Focus on outcome rather than technical detail, which is what I explained in more detail just a few minutes ago. And finally, ensure the summary is understandable even with little product knowledge. As we discussed, the NVD analysts typically have little product knowledge, so that would really help them. So, what we also observed were some on our side were some scoring mistakes that were done a few times, and we also derived some best practices as a result of that. What we saw, for example, is that we had SSH or telnet pre-auth issues that were incorrectly scored with attack vector local. But as you all know, SSH telnet both run across TCP and IP, so they can easily cross network boundaries. And for pre-auth, like by sending a specially crafted unauthenticated SSH packet, you can crash a device. Click on a reload, which then results in a denial of service. That's something that should have been scored with attack vector network, because that's just how the attacker can reach that. And only for post-auth issues, we typically should use the attack vector local. And then another thing that we saw that we had specifically mentioned that persuading a user was required for the attacker to achieve their goal. And in those cases, of course, we need user interaction marked as required. That's the CVSS v3.1 version, and 4.0 that would then mean user interaction active. And finally, there were CVSS specification interpretation differences. I covered one of them, which is the security policy bypass. Does it imply scope change and integrity low impact? Do we consider the protected network as a security boundary? Where we had disagreements between Cisco and NVD. And the second issue that we saw is what we are Cisco typically did whenever vulnerability required admin level privileges to be exploitable. We considered that in most cases there couldn't be any availability impact associated with that vulnerability, because we score on privileges gained and not privileges attained. And an admin level user can typically disable interfaces, services, reboot the box at will anyway. So any availability impact would be not really a privilege gained or retained, privilege gained, but something that's already there. There can certainly be exceptions to that rule, like if exploiting a vulnerability means fully breaking a device, which a normal admin user cannot do. Then it's a different story, but in most cases, we consider that, well, if an admin level user is required, then there cannot be impact to availability. There was also different perception of that part of the CVSS standard at the NVD side, and they viewed different methods to achieve the same outcome, privileges gained, which we view differently. These issues were then brought back into the first CVSS SIG, thanks to Nick Lealy from Cisco and Chris Turner from NVD, and they are actively discussed there at the moment. So we don't have a final solution yet, but this is being actively discussed. We hope to have an agreement there at some point, or CVSS documentation improved as a result of that. And that brings me already to the end of my presentation. So what questions do you have?
Those online, feel free to post your questions into the track 2 Discord. Anyone in the room? We have a question in the room, Michael.
Hello, Michael. Thank you for sharing in detail what you guys did. Is there any more longitudinal analysis? You specifically picked certain ones, but did you do any longitudinal analysis to see a number of, you mentioned only very early the differences between NVD and you, but did you do anything larger to see what is the pattern of mistakes? That's all, thank you.
Well, the analysis is really on these well, 80 CVEs that we observed, but there were definitely patterns in there that we saw yet and again, especially around privileges required, around scope change, that applies or not. And the reasons were typically those that I listed. I didn't review other CNAs CVEs, so that's I didn't go that broad. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, mostly. I'm just asking internally, even Cisco, not broadly NVD, Cisco's own trend of things that seem to be different from you and NVD's of your own products, not all of NVD's products. Does that make sense?
No, not sure I'm getting what you're after. So well, this was an investigation internally, and well, I did look through a number of CVEs here, and yeah, as I said, there were clear patterns.
Okay,
I'm not sure what more you're after.
Yeah, so it is all your products. When you walked through, it looked like you're talking about a very specific CVE, but
okay. Yeah, no. It covered a variety of our products, not just our firewalls that I had in this as an example here, but there were also across our product portfolio.
Okay, Michael, here's the next question.
Sure.
Hi, Michael. I'm wondering, so we normally write our advisories with the focus on the customer, who we assume knows what their product does. How involved do you imagine it's going to be to add information to make sure that NVD understands that what FTD is, as opposed, when obviously if we're writing for the customer, we assume that they know that what the FTD does.
Right. Yeah, I think that's definitely the most challenging part, getting it understandable for folks with little product knowledge. And there's definitely no way we will ever be able to fully do that. Well, we cannot fit the the full product documentation or product overview into every of our advisories. That's definitely not going to happen. But I think we can at least try to, yeah, if we focus more on outcome than on technical details in advisory, I think that's going to help. Really focus on what can be achieved and then explain all of our reasonings for why we scored things the way we did. If that's something that deviates from the norm, yeah, especially in regards to privilege, this required attack complexity scope. I think those are the most important ones where we need to provide clarity on why we're scoring a given way. I think that will bring us a long way already. And then if they are really rare products, then maybe it might be helpful to get some additional context. But you're right, it's not something that we'll be able to do in full depth.
Hi. So one of the questions that I had is we're CNA, so we kind of go through the same kind of discussions with NVD about rescoring, and one of the things that we're looking at doing is kind of setting up a common language when we're starting to do those reports. But I think there's a tension there because, you know, having the baseline, you know, what actually happens, that's going to be important for people out in the field. But I would also say that having the technical details for analysts, I think, is very important, because then you could say, okay, you know, this function's vulnerable, you know, do you use this function? And that'll help, you know, as you prepare your response. Would you say that tension is there? And would you have any suggestions for kind of balancing out, you know, the needs of clearly communicating to groups like NVD and, you know, having the more technical understanding for people who are working more directly with the product?
Well, I think what we are doing, we're never sharing different levels of information to different groups. We're always transparent to everyone involved. And when I said in the presentation, we'll focus more on outcome than technical detail, I'm not saying leave the technical detail completely out, but add the outcome. That's I think is the big message. Add understanding on what, by using those technical steps, what you can achieve, or what the potential attack you can achieve. What is the impact to the business? What is the impact to the network, to the device itself, or whatever systems are impacted?
So as a consumer of a lot of this information, who deals with vulnerabilities way more than I care to admit, among more products than I care to admit, when there is conflicting information from NVD and other sources on the severities, should we be erring on the side of caution or the side of not caution? Is it better to overestimate some of the findings depending on who says what, or how is the best way for us to manage that and prioritize all the hundreds of vulnerabilities that get identified daily?
Well, I would say in general, the vendors typically know their products best. But if in doubt, I think, well, reach out, voice your concern. In many cases, the vendor might not be aware that there's a difference, because, well, with the number of CVEs that are published, also we cannot review every single of them. So yeah, reach out to the vendor if you have concerns, and I'm sure we will be able to clarify why we scored in a given way, and why we believe that what we scored is the best way possible. And if not, of course, well, we make mistakes too, right? So that's what was also clear in the course of this investigation. There were also mistakes on our side. And even though we have the full information available, which NVD did not have in some cases.
Hey, Michael, we have a few questions that have come in online. Rob asks, is there data available about how various vendors stack up with scoring discrepancies? And is this data publicly available on NVD? If so, what is the link?
Yep, it is. That's also all vendors that participate in the CVE EMEA program of NVD, and which I believe are all vendors or all CNAs that feed directly into NVD. Actually, let me bring up the next slide where I have some resources. The last two links that you see there are the links to the reports that I analyzed. They are publicly available. And you can also get to reports from other vendors there. That data is public. Yes.
Thank you, Michael. The next question comes in from Garish. How often do you have disagreements within your internal teams, such as red team versus blue team? What kind of disagreements, and how do you resolve them?
Well, it does happen, definitely. There is agreements on scoring. One way we attack that is that for every vulnerability that we publish, there are 2 incident managers that need to agree upon a score before it can go out. That's one thing that we do to ensure consistency as much as possible. Then yes, sometimes the internal organizations that report vulnerabilities into us have a different perception on scores. We then typically discuss with them. And third, we have an internal committee that we call the CVSS elders, where if there are bigger concerns, where folks can bring up their CVs or their vulnerabilities, and then from the most experienced folks on our team will get help. We have both a mailer and also a weekly call where folks can bring up their concerns.
Thank you, Mike.
And in some cases, even we need to bring things back to the CVS SIG. Right? So in some cases, it's not even us. In some cases, it might be the standard that might be unclear in some aspects. So we have already brought things back to the CVS SIG as well that came out of those discussions.
Thank you, Michael. We have another question from Rob. In your opinion, how can third-party threat intelligence serve to minimize risk related to scoring discrepancies?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. In your opinion, how can third-party threat intelligence serve to minimize risk related to scoring discrepancies?
I don't think they can. The CSS score is not really about risk. It's about the intrinsic impact of a vulnerability. If you're talking risk, then it's more like the EPSS realm, or other maybe some. Well, at least if we only score the CSS base metrics, or it's CSS environmental metrics that would impact. That's not something that we're looking at here. So because of that, I don't think. Well, we are not talking about risk here. The risk assessment is something that our customers will need to make based on the impact of the vulnerability based on our score, and based on how it is used in the environment. That's not something we as the vendor can do.
Thank you. Any other questions in the room or online? Michael, also I'm seeing that the links to the NVD reports may not be working. If you have updated links to provide the attendees.
Okay, I checked them yesterday. They were still working, but I can double check. I will test them after the call, and I'll report back in the Discord space.
Sure thing. Thank you so much. All right. Last call for questions. Nothing in the room, not seeing anything online. So Michael, if you want to end here, we can. Or if you have more.
Good. No, I don't have anything else. Thank you very much for attention. Thanks for the great questions. And enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much.